this series of videos we will start explaining the physics course for IGCSE students, course code 0.0625. First of all, we'll start by making a quick revision on some mathematical points or mathematical operations we need to use it in our syllabus or in solving the problem that we will face. First, we will start by finding the value of unknown in an equation of one unknown only. The first one, x over 2 equal to 5 over 3. In this one we need to find the value of x. To find the value of x in this operation, we need to make a cross multiplication. To make a cross multiplication, we can draw a large X like this and marking the side that contain the unknown. Our unknown is X, so we need to find the value of X. So we write X equal, where is the side that has a complete numbers, the complete numbers in this side, which are 2 and 5. So we will multiply them and put them in the numerator of the fraction. So we will put in the numerator 2 times 5, and the side that contains the unknown is x and 3. We will put any number in this side in the denominator of the fraction. So we will put the 3 in the denominator of the fraction. So the value of x in this equation will be 2 times 5 is 10 over 3. So to make a cross multiplication, first we need to determine the side that contains the unknown, and then the complete side we multiply the numbers in it and put them in the numerator of the fraction, and the side that contains the unknown we put the numbers in it in the denominator of the fraction. So x will be equal at 10 over 3. The second one, 5 plus x over 2 equals to 4, and we need to find the value of x. First of all, we need to let the fraction x over 2 only on the left hand side. So we need to get rid of the 5 from this side. If we look to the sign of the 5 has a positive sign, so we can put it in the right hand side, but by changing its side. 5 has a positive sign. To convert it or to transfer it to the other side, we need to reverse the sign from positive to negative. So x over 2 will equal 4 minus 5. So we can write x over 2 equal negative 1. We need to find the value of x. We can also, if we make it two fractions like this, by putting a 1 under negative 1. To make a cross multiplication like the previous one, we can make a large X like this and determine the side that contains the unknown. Our unknown in this one is the value of x, so we can write x equals, where is the complete side? The complete side that contains 2 and the negative 1. So we can multiply them and put them in the numerator of the fraction. So here we can write 2 times negative 1. And the side that contains the unknown only has number 1. So we can put this number in the denominator of the fraction. So we can find the value of x. It will be 2 times negative 1, negative 2. And negative 2 over 1, it will give us negative 2. The second thing that we need to deal with it is how to deal with a graph and how to get the slope of any graph. First of all, we need to know the aim of drawing a graph. The aim of drawing any graph is knowing the relation between the two parameters, the one that you put on x-axis and the one that you put on the y-axis. So in any graph we have two parameters and we need to know the relation between them. To read a graph when you start to read a graph to get the information format, we want only to know what will happen to the y parameter when the value of x increases. Any graph you start to learn or to deal with, you need to know what will happen to the value of the parameter that put on the y-axis when the value of x-axis increases. So if you look at this graph, we will start by noticing the relation between x and y. First, if we look to the number on x-axis, first we start from the origin. So x value at the first was 0. Then it becomes 1, then 2, then 3. So if we look to the number of numbers on the x-axis, we will notice that the x-axis numbers is increasing. And if we look to the y-axis, at first the y was 0, then it becomes 1, then 2, then 3. So the y-axis also is increasing. So in this graph, the x-axis increases, and as a result to the increasing of x-axis, the y-axis numbers increasing also. So on this graph, if the value of x-axis increased, the value of y-axis also will increase. So in this relation, we called it a direct proportional relation. The second thing that we need to know from the graph, after knowing the relation between the two parameters x and y, is getting the slope or the gradient of the line. First of all, we need to know the meaning of the slope or gradient of the line. If you look on this graph, we will find that the drawn line is making an angle with the x-axis, which means that this line is inclined on the x-axis by an angle. So we can relate the slope to this angle. The slope meaning or the gradient means we need to know the degree of inclination between the line and the x-axis. We need to know if this angle is a large one or a small one. So the slope is a number that gives us an indicator to the angle between the line and the x-axis. If we have a large angle or between the line and the x-axis, that means the slope will be a large number. And if we have a small angle between the line and the x-axis, the slope will be a small number. So the slope is an indicator to the angle between the line and the x-axis. To calculate the slope between of the graph, we need to first determine two points, any 2 points from our straight line. First point we can choose is this point. If we look at this point, we'll find its x number is 1 and its y number is 1 also. And this is our first point, so we can call its x number is x1 and its y number a y1. And then we need to choose any other point. We can choose this point. If you look at x-axis, we will find its x number is 4 and its y number also is 4. And this our second point, so we can call it its x number as x2 and its y number a y2. At first we need to determine any 2 points from our straight line. Then to calculate the slope, we can calculate it from this relation. To calculate the slope, we can use this equation, which is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So we can substitute by the number we choose from the graph. First, the y2 is 4 and the y1 is 1, and then x2 is 4, and x1 is 1. If we calculate this number, it will give us a 1. So the slope of this graph is 1. Let's compare the result of another graph, but with a smaller angle, to make sure that if the angle gets smaller, the slope will get smaller also. First, to calculate the slope, we said that we need to determine any 2 points from the line. The first point we can choose is this point. Its x-axis is 4 and its y number is 1, and this is our first point, so we can call its x is x1 and its y number y1, and then we need to choose any other point. We can choose this point. Its x-axis is 6 and its y number approximately is 1.5, and this is the other point or the second point, so we can call its x number x2 and its y number y2, and then we can substitute in the equation of the slope. We said that the slope equal y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. The y2 number is 1.5 and the y1 number is 1, and x2 is 6 and x1 is 4. If we calculate it, it will give us 0.5 over 2, which will give 0.25. Let's compare the results of this one with the previous one. The previous one gives us a slope of 1 and the angle was large, but by decreasing the angle, the slope becomes 0.25. So we can make sure that by any change that we make in the angle between the line and the x-axis, we can conclude it from the value of the slope. If the slope has a large number, this means that the angle between the line and the x-axis is large, and if the slope has a small number, that means that the line has a small angle with the x-axis. The third graph that we need to study is this one. Let's at first conclude the relation between the x-axis and y-axis. If we look at the x-axis numbers, at first the x was 0, then 1, then 2, then 3. So the x numbers are increasing. And if we look at the y-axis at first was 2, then 3, then 4. So the y-axis also is increasing. But what is the difference between this one and the previous one? The previous one, at first the x was 0 and the y is 0, and they were increasing with the same rate. If the x-axis increased to double, the y-axis will increase to double, and if the x-axis increased 3 times, the y-axis will increase 3 times. So they are changing with the same rate, so we called it a direct proportional relation. But at this graph, they are increasing, but with a different rate. At the first, the x-axis was 0, but the y-axis has a value, so they are increasing but with a different rate. To differentiate between this one and the previous graph, we call this relation a linear relation. So in these two graphs, the parameter x and parameter y are following the same pattern. They are increasing or decreasing by the same pattern, but the difference, at the first graph they are increasing with the same rate, but at the second one or the third one that we are talking about, they are increasing or decreasing but with different rate. So the difference between the two graphs is the rate of change. If they are changing with the same rate, we called it a direct proportional relation, but if they are changing with a different rates, we called it a linear relation. The fourth graph that we need to study also is this one. At first, let's conclude the relation between the x and y. As usual, the numbers on the x-axis are increasing. At first, the line starts from this point. At first, the x-axis was 0, then it becomes 1, then 2, then 4, and so on. So the x numbers, as usual, they are increasing. But let us look at the y numbers. The y at first was 3, then it becomes 2, then 1, which means that the y numbers are decreasing. So here we have a different pattern. The x-axis increasing, and as a result, the y-axis is decreasing. So they are opposite to each other. And this relation, we called it the inverse relation. Let's calculate the graph, the slope of this graph. At first, also we need to choose any 2 points. The first point we can choose is this one. If we look at its number, its x number, it will be 0, and its y number is 3. And this is our first point, so we can call it x number. We can call its x number is x1, and its y number y2. Sorry, y1. And we need a second point. We can choose this one. This one, its x number is 4, and its y number is 0. And this is our second point, so we can call its x number x2 and its y number y2. Let's substitute in the equation of the slope. We'll say that the slope equal y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. y2 is 0 and y1 is 3, and then x2 is 4 and x1 is 0. It will give us negative 3 over 4. What is the difference between the value or the result of this slope compared with the previous one? If we look to the sign of this slope, the sign here is negative, but at the previous one it was positive. So we can conclude another information from the slope. If the slope was a positive number, that means they are increasing or decreasing as each other, which means that they are following the same pattern. The x increases, the y increases. The x decreases, the y decreases. But if the slope is a negative number, that means that they are inverse to each other. By increasing the x number, the y will decrease. So they are opposite to each other. So if the slope is positive, that means that they are following the same pattern. But if the slope is the negative number, that means that they are in opposite relation or inverse relation. The graph number 5 is this one. In this one, at first we need to know the relation between the x and y. As usual also, the x numbers are increasing. We start by 0, then 1, then 2, then 3. So the x numbers are increasing. But if we look at the y-axis, we will find that the y number is constant along the graph, which is 3. So which means that by increasing the x numbers, the y-axis has no change. So which means that there is no relation between them. And to find the slope, we said that the slope is related to the angle between the line and the x-axis. And if we look at this line, we will find that this line is parallel to the x-axis. And any two parallel lines, the angle between them is 0. which means that there is no angle between them. And if the angle is 0 and the slope is depending on the angle, we conclude that the slope is here equal 0. We need to add another note on these graphs. On all of these graphs, the line was a straight line, and if we look at the angle by drawing a straight line, we can conclude that always the angle between the line and the x-axis will be constant. So which means that the angle will not change along the line, and we said that the slope is depending on the angle between the line and the x-axis. So from this information we can conclude that the slope will be constant as long as the graph is a straight line. So because if the graph is a straight line, the angle between the line and the x-axis will be constant. So as a result, the slope of the graph will be constant. So any graph is drawn as a straight line, its slope will be constant. And this means if you choose any 2 points from the straight line and calculate the slope, it will give you the same number. The following information that we need to know also from the graph is calculating the area under line and what is the indicate of this area. At first, if we have a graph like this, straight line, and the y number is 5 and the x number is 10, this shape under the line is a rectangle. So if we want to calculate the area of this shape, we can say that the area will equal to the length times the width. So it will be 10 times 5, which will give us a 50. What is this 50 number indicates on from this graph? This number, if we look at the graph, we multiplied the y number by the x number. So we can say that the area under the line is related or gives us information about the average of multiplying x times y. So any graph we calculate the area under the line of it gives us an indicate or a quantity that represents the average of x times y. To make a more clear example, we can draw a graph between speed and time, and let's draw it in this form. Let's assume this number is 10 and this one is 10. At first, we need to calculate the area under the line. If we determine this shape, it will be a triangle. So we can say that the area will be equal to half the base times the height, which will give us half times 10 times 5. If we calculate it, it will give us 25. What is the number 25 represents here? We multiplied the 10, which is a speed, by the 10 which is a time. If we remember the equation of the speed is equal to the distance over the time. If we make a cross multiplication, it will give us distance equal speed times time. And we said that the area under the line gives us the average of x times y, and here x times y represents the distance. So we can say that the area under this graph, which is 25, gives us this distance or the average distance that is cut by the object. So here we can conclude that the distance is equal to 25 meter. For example, if the unit here is meter per second and the time here has a second unit. The graph number 7 we need to study if the graph was a curve instead of a straight line. If the graph was a curve instead of a straight line, we will find that it has a various angle at each point. At first, this will be the straight line and the angle will be 90. And then the line becomes in this shape and the angle is changing by moving along the curve. So here we can conclude that the angle is changing, and as a result of this change, the slope also will be changed. So at this graph, or in this graph, we need to know what is the pattern or what is the change that occurs to the graph. So to determine this change, we need to choose 2 points. First point will be at the first on the first point of the graph or the curve, and the second point will be the last one. And at each point of them, we will draw a tangent line to the curve. At this point, which is the first one, if we move along the curve, we will find that our hand will move upward. So here we will draw a straight line upward like this. This line makes angle 90 with the x-axis. If the angle between the line and the x-axis is 90, we can conclude that at this point the slope is maximum. And then at the last point, if we draw a line along the curve, we will find that our hand is moving to the right direction. So the straight line here will be in the right direction. Here this line is parallel to the x-axis, and we said that if the line is parallel to the x-axis, the angle between it and the x-axis will be 0. So the slope here is 0. So we here at this point we have a minimum slope. So we can conclude that at the first the slope was maximum, and at the end it becomes minimum. So the slope on this curve is decreasing. We started by a maximum number and we ended with a minimum number. The following one is also a curve, so the slope is changing. So to determine the change that occurs on this graph, we need to determine 2 points. Point at the start and point at the end. If we draw a line at this point along the curve, we will find that our hand will move to the right direction. So we will draw a line to the right direction. This line is parallel to the x-axis, so the slope at this point is minimum. And at the last point, if we draw a line along the curve, we will find that the curve is moving downward, so we'll draw a straight line downward like this. This line also makes an angle 90 with the x-axis, and we said that if the line is making an angle 90 with the x-axis, the slope at this point will be a maximum slope. So the slope at the first was minimum and then becomes a maximum value. So we can conclude that the slope is increasing on this curve. Also on the graph number 9, we need to determine at first 2 points. First point is the starting point and the second point is the last point. And then we need to draw a straight line at each of them. If we draw a line along the curve at the first point, we'll find that our hand will move to the right direction. So we'll draw a line to the right direction. This line is set over the x-axis, which means that the angle between it and the x-axis is 0. So we can conclude that at this point the slope is a minimum value. And then the last one, if we draw a straight line along the curve at this point, we'll find that our hand is moving in upward direction. So the line at this point will be drawn upward like this. This line is making an angle 90 with the x-axis, and we said that if the line is making an angle 90 with the x-axis, we can conclude that at this point the slope is a maximum slope. So on this curve we started by a minimum slope, and at the end it becomes maximum value, which means that the slope on this curve is increasing. The last one is this one. We need to determine 2 points, point at the first and point at the end. If we draw a line along the curve at the first point, we'll find that our hand is moving downward like this, which means that the line here is making an angle 90 with the x-axis. And we said that if the line is making angle 90 with the x-axis, the slope is at this point is a maximum slope. And then the last point, if we draw a line along the curve at this point, we'll find that our hand is moving to the right direction. This line is parallel to the x-axis, and we said that if the line is parallel to the x-axis, the slope at this point will be a minimum slope. So in this curve we started by a maximum slope and ended with a minimum one. So the slope on this curve is decreasing.